starts right now with breaking news.
We're following the breaking news out of Washington tonight, where protesters stormed the Capitol and broke inside. At least one woman has died after being shot on Capitol grounds.
It is a rapidly developing story as police and the National Guard trying to regain control of the Capitol. This is a live look at Washington, D.C., where at this hour curfew has been enacted. Over the last few hours, the mayor of Washington called today's events, quoting now, shameful and unpatriotic.
The Capitol building was locked down as supporters of President Trump broke into the building just as lawmakers were meeting to vote to affirm the Electoral College results. These protests not just happening in Washington, D.C., but all over the country, from Las Vegas to Minneapolis, Sacramento, California, to Lincoln, Nebraska.
Both President Donald Trump and President-elect Joe Biden have addressed the public. Now, in a live address to the nation, President-elect Biden called on President Trump to, quote, step up, in that our democracy is under, quote, now unprecedented assault. President Trump then releasing a video on Twitter saying the rioters are, quote, now special, but need to go home now.
We have team coverage tonight from our nation's capital, as our team has been on the ground throughout the day. Tonight, we begin with our national correspondent Christine Frizzell on Capitol Hill with the latest on the protest.
On Capitol Hill, tensions running high as Trump supporters broke past barriers, scaled barricades, and stormed the Capitol.
We own you!
Hundreds getting inside, walking footsteps away from both chambers of Congress. Surrounding buildings evacuated. Staffers and lawmakers told to shelter in place. Outside, most of those taking part in the protest not only support President Trump, they believe he actually won the election, despite overwhelming evidence he did not.
So you don't believe Joe Biden got more votes than Donald Trump?
No, I do not.
There's serious problems with accounting for all the machine errors and the systematic nature of the fraud that's taken place.
In MAGA hats, in flags and flats, they came from near and far.
We drove up from South Florida to pick up our daughter in Georgia, and here we are today after 20 hours of driving.
One central theme of the day came down to this.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen.
It's no coincidence this march was scheduled for the same day as the Electoral College certification inside Congress. Right now, protesters are making their way to the Capitol building, where many of them truly believe lawmakers will intervene to keep Donald Trump in the White House.
I came out here to support the President of the United States and to stop the steal. This is our last chance to save our republic.
Many here holding on to the election of the past. Others making the case he is the future.
This isn't their Republican Party anymore. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party.
I'm Christine Frizzell reporting.
Governors and representatives from Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota are taking to social media denouncing the protests at the U.S. Capitol. Senator Chuck Grassley, who is third in the line of succession for the presidency, is in a secure location, saying on Twitter, quote, today's violent attack on the U.S. Capitol was an attack on American democracy itself. I condemn today's violence in the strongest terms, and perpetrators deserve to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Governor Kim Reynolds also saying, quote, this behavior is unacceptable and not who we are as Americans. And Representative Randy Feenstra also is denouncing the protests, calling for protests to remain peaceful. You can see all of Iowa's representatives' responses to today's breaking news on our website, SiouxlandNews.com.
Now, before the chaos descended on the Capitol complex, the House floor was the center of attention. A minority of Republican lawmakers had just succeeded in raising their first objection to certification of the Electoral College vote. This joint session to Congress provided over by the Vice President. St. Clair national correspondent James Rosen has that part of the story from Capitol Hill.
Madam Speaker, members of Congress.
Moments before he gavelled the joint session of Congress to order amid COVID-19 restrictions on seating, Vice President Pence, acting in his constitutional role as President of the Senate, released a 3-page letter to lawmakers declaring that his powers in that role do not give him the authority to decide on his own which electoral votes get counted and which can be tossed out.
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
It took only 7 minutes after the successful reading of the electoral votes for Alabama and Alaska before the Republicans posed their first objection.
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
GOP lawmakers applauded Senator Ted Cruz, once among President Trump's harshest critics, when he backed the objection. That forced the joint session to adjourn, so members in each chamber, House and Senate, could spend up to 2 hours debating whether to accept Arizona's electoral votes, a process all but certain to end with acceptance by each chamber. In the Senate, both leaders, perhaps soon to switch roles, given the results in Georgia's Senate runoffs, condemned the objection.
The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever.
What message will we send to fledgling democracies who study our Constitution, mirror our laws and traditions, in the hopes that they too can build a country ruled by the consent of the governed?
The GOP objectors seized on the usually ceremonial certification of the Electoral College vote to air what they claim is compelling evidence of massive voter fraud, a claim already rejected by election officials in all 50 states and by state and federal courts.
Simply telling the voters, go jump in a lake, the fact that you have deep concerns is of no moment to us. That jeopardizes, I believe, the legitimacy of this and subsequent elections.
The debate in each house didn't progress much beyond that after pro-Trump protesters breached security and Capitol Police locked down the entire complex. On Capitol Hill, James Rosen.
The Senate races in Georgia are likely to have a major impact on the Biden administration. Some final numbers to be confirmed, but Democrats were able to claim the first big victory. How did they do it, and what role did the pandemic play in these critical runoffs? We have a look now from Sinclair's chief political correspondent, Scott Thuman, who's in Georgia.
Georgia and the nation waking up to a new reality. The tides seemingly turning in the state and elsewhere with the victory of Reverend Raphael Warnock over incumbent Republican Kelly Loeffler.
The 82-year-old hands that used to pick somebody else's cotton went to the polls and picked her youngest son to be a United States Senator.
John Ossoff also declaring victory over David Perdue.
We're talking about two races, 4 million votes decided by basically a percentage point. Any one of 1,000 things could make a difference of 1 percentage point.
What role did COVID play?
That's the big issue. But ultimately, do you want to help Joe Biden or do you want to hurt Joe Biden?
While President-elect Biden said vote Democrat and get those $2,000 stimulus checks, Georgians we talked to who voted Democrat didn't mention money. They talked more about overall change.
People are obviously not satisfied with life in America as it is, and they want to do something to change it.
And they did it multiple ways. Maybe 1 million Georgians voted by mail and used drop-off locations, though Republican officials often fought against the concept, the president attacking the system as unsafe.
The fact is, some Republicans probably just abstained. Some of the craziness around the claims of election fraud.
Even though the results are close in a state that has been reliably red for 2 decades, Republicans will be asking themselves, is this a sign of the changing times, a repudiation of President Trump, or possibly both? In Savannah, Georgia, I'm Scott Thuman.
As the events continue to unfold in Washington, D.C. tonight, please stay with Siouxland News for the latest details. We have complete coverage online at SiouxlandNews.com, on our Siouxland News Facebook page, and on our free Siouxland News app. We continue our coverage tonight of the violent protests in Washington, D.C., where a curfew was put in place at the top of the hour. As we take a live look at our nation's capital tonight, officials in Washington saying the Capitol building, which was breached this afternoon, has been secured. What we know so far is that at least one person has died after being shot on Capitol grounds. Countless others have been arrested. We go on the ground now in Washington for the very latest.
Well, there is no other way to describe it besides chaos at the Capitol. You can look right behind me here and see that there are people on the steps leading up to the Capitol building. You can hear people making announcements, some talking about civil war here. We've seen images throughout the day that we never thought we would see. Just a few steps away, you're hearing counter-protesters telling these people that they are in the wrong for making a stand such as this. Earlier, the Capitol breached. Somebody shot here. And now it looks to be free reign at the Capitol building. We have been making our way through the crowd. In some parts, it appears to be thinning out in some areas, but we also see people standing here with flags flying and no end in sight. We're going to stand here and we're going to continue to watch as things develop here in the nation's capital. People with "Don't Tread on Me" flags on the steps of the Capitol building right now, and police keeping a distance at this point. The National Guards have been activated, and so we'll have to keep an eye on this and see where this goes from here. In Washington, D.C., Carl Willis.
Demonstrations were not only happening in Washington, but also in Nebraska as well. This was the scene earlier today at the Capitol in Lincoln, where dozens gathered in protest of the election results. And like many across the nation, this one did remain peaceful. One protester, Tim Davis, explained why he felt the need to protest the Electoral College results.
Once the election's done and over with, we're going to be fighting not just for election integrity, but to also preserve all of our rights and freedoms that we know are at risk. I was actually just talking to a couple people not too long ago that, that experienced the issues that we have with online censorship when it comes to social media.
Now, beyond concerns over the First Amendment, Davis also mentioned protecting Second Amendment rights that he and the group feel are at risk as well. Well, as the events continue to unfold in Washington and across the country tonight, please stay with Siouxland News for the latest details. We have complete coverage online at SiouxlandNews.com, on our Siouxland News Facebook page, and on our free Siouxland News app. And stay with KMEG 14 for CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell following this newscast.
This is Siouxland News at 5 on KMEG 14.
Yesterday, in my view, one of the darkest days in the history of our nation. An unprecedented assault on our democracy.
To those whose purpose was to deter our responsibility, you have failed.
I was shocked, I was heartbroken, and I was pissed off and angry by seeing this violent mob.
I was fearful for my life and trying to protect my colleagues.
May God bless all who serve here and those who protect this place.
It's a quiet night on Capitol Hill as they begin to heal after a deadly day of riots yesterday and the Capitol building's first breach since the War of 1812. 4 people are dead, including Ashley Babbitt, a San Diego Air Force veteran who stormed the Capitol building. 3 others suffered fatal medical emergencies.
This is a live look at Washington, D.C. right now. There are also strong condemnations directed towards President Trump from both sides of the political aisle. And with 2 weeks left in office, some are now calling for President Trump's removal. The latest from Washington, D.C., it is first at 5 o'clock tonight. We have team coverage this evening from our nation's capital.
Christine Frizzell is with us to break down Capitol security and how the first breach of the Capitol building in more than 200 years was possible. But first, we go to national correspondent Audra El-Nashar on Capitol Hill with a look at the riots' aftermath and what happens next.
A blistering attack from President-elect Biden on President Trump's behavior.
He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
Sobering images of destruction inside the U.S. Capitol. The People's House now surrounded with fencing.
What happened yesterday is a wake-up call to many.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois becoming the first Republican to call for President Trump's removal through the 25th Amendment.
All indications are that the president has become unmoored, not just from his duty, nor even his oath, but from reality itself.
Democrats like Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono tell Sinclair it's too risky to allow President Trump to serve the short remainder of his term.
He can do a lot of damage. Look what he did in just a few days' time to encourage all these people to storm the Capitol. So there's a genuine fear among the military and among a lot of people.
Incoming Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling for the president's immediate removal, either by the 25th Amendment or impeachment.
The President of the United States incited an armed insurrection.
A group of House Democrats quickly drawing up articles of impeachment, though many believe they won't succeed.
I would hope that the House of Representatives would spend its time concentrating on getting ready for this new administration.
Over at the White House, a wave of resignations. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao joining at least 7 others as of Thursday afternoon, including Mick Mulvaney, who at one point served as President Trump's chief of staff.
But I can't stay here. Not after yesterday. You can't look at that yesterday and think I want to be a part of that in any way, shape, or form.
Former Attorney General William Barr blaming President Trump for what happened, telling the Associated Press the president's reaction Wednesday was a, quote, betrayal of his office and supporters. For the very first time, President Trump is acknowledging President-elect Biden will be the next president, putting out a statement through his aides that there will be an orderly transition of power. Of course, he couldn't put the statement out himself because his Twitter account has been frozen and Facebook is banning his account for at least the remainder of his term. On Capitol Hill, I'm Atrell Nashar.
While many lawmakers are calling for Vice President Mike Pence to enact the 25th Amendment, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley says it's not possible, but he does condone President Trump's actions. In a statement, Senator Grassley says everyone must take responsibility for the destructive actions yesterday, including the president. As a leader of the nation, the president bears some responsibility for the actions that he inspires, good or bad. Sadly, yesterday he displayed poor leadership in his words and actions, and he must take responsibility.
More than 60 arrests have now been made by the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington. Authorities also found 2 pipe bombs, each placed outside the Democratic and Republican National Committee building. But one question lingers: how were so many rioters able to get so close to elected leaders in a building supposed to be surrounded by security? Sinclair National correspondent Christine Frizzell picks up this part of the story.
It was a stunning scene Wednesday that many Americans thought they'd never see. A single officer forced to retreat while protecting elected leaders, including the Vice President of the United States and, in some ways, democracy itself. It was one man against a mob. Questions now pouring in about how hundreds could infiltrate a federal building and remain inside for hours.
There are leaders in foreign countries that do not wish us will, that are reveling in what they saw yesterday. And we just showed how easy it was to overrun our police in the Capitol building.
Top city officials calling what happened a failure. Washington, D.C.'s mayor suggesting a lack of communication between departments may be in part to blame.
The Capitol, the White House, and other federal installations in the district have their own police departments, the United States Capitol Police. And we cannot decide for the Capitol, the members of Congress, that we are going to be their police department.
24 hours later, security has been massively ramped up, including this non-scalable fence being erected around the perimeter of the U.S. Capitol. The inauguration less than 2 weeks away. But what about after that? There are some major questions about the security for Washington long term.
And I don't want to resolve ourselves to having soldiers on our street. That's not us. I mean, we are supposed to be different.
Questions about who we are as a country and how to best protect the citizens inside, now part of a new reality in Washington. I'm Christine Frizzell reporting.
Today, the United States Capitol Police responded to yesterday's incident, saying in a statement they had a robust plan to address the anticipated First Amendment activities, adding that the mass riots that occurred were not First Amendment activities. The statement also adds that Capitol Police officers were heroic given the situation they faced. President Trump has now been banned from posting on Facebook until he's out of office. Facebook said in a statement, quote, Trump intends to use his remaining time in office to undermine the peaceful and lawful transition of power to his elected successor, Joe Biden. Facebook also said the president's account has been blocked indefinitely. Facebook isn't the only platform to silence the president. Twitter and Snapchat also blocked the president's accounts.
In the early morning hours of today, Congress officially certified the Electoral College votes, solidifying Joe Biden's win in the November election.
The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes.
After more than 7 hours of unrest in the nation's capital, many Republican lawmakers who had vowed to oppose the election results, well, they reversed course. Now, following the violence on Capitol Hill and weeks of refusing to concede, President Trump has released a statement early this morning agreeing to an orderly transfer of power, reading in part, even though I totally disagree with the outcome of the election and the facts bear me out, nevertheless, there will be an orderly transition on January the 20th.
Continuing our coverage tonight from Washington, D.C., D.C. police saying moments ago that 4 people have died. 1 woman was shot and 3 others had unspecified medical emergencies. 2 pipe bombs were also recovered outside both the Democratic and Republican National Committee buildings. Taking a live look now at our nation's capital tonight, and for the latest, we turn to Heather Graf on the ground in Washington.
A citywide curfew took effect here in the nation's capital at 6 o'clock this evening. And in the hours since, we have seen a much quieter scene than the chaos and the violence that we saw unfold earlier today. Take a look behind me and you will see the massive law enforcement presence. So in this crowd, we have the DC Police Department, Capitol Police, and we've also seen members of the National Guard out here as well. Starting at 6 p.m. when the curfew took effect, they began to expand the perimeter around the Capitol, slowly moving any remaining protesters back. And since about 7:30, they have been just holding this line here, a large perimeter of law enforcement officers now surrounding the Capitol. We're standing on the west side of the Capitol, and of course, we'll continue to monitor the situation here, but that is the very latest, as we said, at the end of a chaotic day in Washington, D.C. I'm Heather Graf. Back to you.
As events continue to unfold in Washington across the country tonight, please stay with Siouxland News, and we will have the very latest overnight developments tomorrow morning on Siouxland News at sunrise, beginning at 5 a.m.